To us, Earth, Wind & Fire has always been synonymous with 80s disco and hit songs like Boogie Wonderland and Fantasy. Now, our colleague Merlin, our head of content, actually used the name of the band to refer to earthquakes, hurricanes and wildfires. Wonderland Fantasy, climate change reality. The biggest challenge mankind is facing. Insurance carriers and insurtechs alike are taking their role. And in this talk show, our host Sabine van der Linden will explore innovations in insurance products and services that promote climate adaptation and mitigation. In short, how insurance can tackle climate change.
Hi everyone, welcome to our talk show on Earth, Wind and Fire, how insurers can tackle climate change. So I collected a few pieces of statistics for you. Client Earth share that the climate crisis is the greatest challenge facing humanity and threatens the future of life on our planet. An average increase of 1.5 degrees centigrade risks sea level rises, extreme weather, loss of species and habitats, food scarcity, and on and on and on. A few stats. 20 million people a year are forced out of their homes due to climate change. 90% of the world's coral reefs are at risk from warming oceans. 259 billion tons of ice were lost from Greenland between 1993 and 2016. Again, on and on. So let's get into our conversation. We see a lot of data and technology coming to bear to start solving for climate change. And I'm going to start with Sylvia.
Hello, hi, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
I'm great, happy to be here to talk with you about climate.
And I know you do a lot of work from Switzerland on that specific topic,
Yes,
as you have actually built a little bit of a hub just doing that, Sylvia.
Absolutely, so I'm the co-founder of the Swiss InsurTech Hub, and we are basically an InsurTech organization that puts together every single InsurTech that is interested in collaborating in Switzerland. And just now we are launching the ESG and climate chapter, which is also coming to the fact that Switzerland has adhered to going net zero for 2050. So it's a great time for us to actually invest in climate tech in Switzerland. So please obviously come to us. Our organization brings together InsurTech and incumbents, so large organizations such as obviously insurance companies, but also organizations and other associations. So we are here to create a platform for everyone to amplify their message and create opportunity and innovation together.
So my first question to you is, looking at the fact that we have data and technology already available to start addressing the protection gap, how do we start addressing overall environmental risk and particularly climate risk, which is where we see most of the innovation happening in insurance today?
Yeah, that's right. We actually saw yesterday from the pre-event in the conversation with Swiss Re that 75% of risk is uninsured. 75%. And when you were actually saying right now climate risk address only one part of environment, which is the E in ESG. Climate risk addresses the increase in temperature, but actually we are looking at other factors where a company needs to innovate and find solutions, such as, for example, biodiversity or deforestation, as well as ocean and coral reef. So there has been a lot of work here, which is fantastic because it's the most important challenge of our time. And what we have to do, we have to innovate. And it's a great, terrific opportunity for insurtechs to collaborate with incumbents to create partnerships, to create collaboration and innovation. And in the market, there's been actually quite a lot happening right now. So we've seen trends of large insurance companies working with data companies, such as satellite data, but also government data. And what they do, they create parametric solutions for addressing, for example, flood, drought, or wildfire, which are also very difficult to insure.
Indeed.
There are also other collaboration, and I'm very passionate about that, between, for example, like, a triage of companies such as in associations, such as, for example, Climate Alliance, which is the largest alliance in Europe for municipalities to address climate change. And Climate Alliance has recently announced a collaboration with Google in order to provide to the municipalities information about transport, traffic, air pollution, flood, etc. So these are amazing collaboration that our insurtech companies here should also consider about, like, embarking into. And obviously we are here to help.
Awesome. Seed. I remember when we caught up, we talked about the scopes. Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. It'd be great if you could actually explain what the three scopes are and what are the greatest strategy one can start implementing, particularly when looking at Scope 3.
Yeah, so I think this is, as I said, partner McKinsey do most of my work helping insurers modernize. I co-lead some of our work in sustainability and insurance. And one of the things we've realized over the last few years is there's been a tremendous amount of work that has gone into understanding the sustainability elements of what you underwrite, where you invest as insurance. But starting to look back at your own operations and the three scopes is also critical. A lot of insurers have put out robust Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions data, so linked to emissions that they directly kind of manage and control and derive, versus Scope 3, which in the case of insurers, links a lot to your supply chain and your claims handling. And I think the thing I love saying about this is insurance, especially in the P&C space, is a financial services product until the loss occurs. As soon as the loss occurs, it is in the real world, and it starts to become a bricks and mortar product. You've got a property to rebuild, you've got a car that is damaged. These are things in the physical world that require remedying in some way, shape, or form, and that carries a lot of carbon. So we've started doing some research into the scale of this, and in the UK we spend about 15 billion pounds a year on P&C claims, right? So that's a decent chunk of money. That is equivalent in carbon terms to roughly 1 million cars on the roads of the UK, the annual emissions. So it's a significant amount of carbon that comes from claims and Scope 3 emissions of insurers. And we can talk a little bit more about what you can do once you start to recognize that fact.
So I want to move first, before we go into the detail around the metric, because at the end of the day, everything is about measuring what we do. I want to come to you, Alex, because you're already doing a lot at QBE. And it would be great if you could explain how you deal with the lack of historical data, and how do you build strategies to start dealing with climate within your organization?
Yeah, look, and it's a massive challenge, of course, because the nature of innovation means that we have to move quickly, particularly on addressing the challenge of climate change. And a lot of the work that's being done in sustainable energy particularly depends on newer technology. Newer technology means that we don't have that history, the information that we need to understand a risk. And if you can't understand a risk, you can't price a risk. If you can't price a risk, you can't insure it. If you can't insure it, you can't operate it. So this is one of the biggest cycles that we have to solve for in the insurance landscape today. So, there's a lot of amazing technology out there now. I mean, we look at wind farms, we look at solar, we look at battery packs. There's some tremendous opportunities out there. But if you look at some of the things that are happening, we see turbine failures, we see solar panel fires, we see battery pack fires. So finding out why these things happen, how we can address them, how we can potentially work with customers to address risks before they turn into claims, means that this technology can see the light of day in a way that we can engage with the insurance industry. So there's a great example that we have in Australia, and it's one of my favorite things where we bring data platforms and technology and insurance to address one of the challenges of this unknown risk in sustainable energy. And that's in rooftop solar. So Australia has a huge amount of rooftop solar. As you can imagine, we get a lot of sunshine. But there was a regulation in Australia between 2018 and 2021 that rooftop solar panels had what's called an isolation switch, essentially a button that can turn the panels on and off. Unfortunately, they tended not to be sealed very well. That led to an absolute swathe of rooftop solar panel fires. So here we are trying to address climate change. Here we are trying to create energy through solar, and instead it's causing a loss of businesses, it's causing a loss of homes. So one of the ways that we're starting to look at this is actually using some of our satellite-based and aerial data platforms, the TensorFlight platform as an example of that. I think they're here today. And using platforms like that, we can actually see when solar panels appeared on the roof of a building. And if we can see it appeared in that time frame, we can go to the customer, we can give them a free review of their panels. If they've got one of these switches that's faulty, it can be replaced. They can safely operate their sustainable energy platform. We can prevent a fire. Everybody wins. And this is one of my favorite things in insurance, when we can enable a customer to do what they do, to engage in their business, to keep them safe, and in some cases to mitigate or entirely prevent a claim. So this is going to be the nature of sustainable energy going forward. We need to encourage innovation. Encouraging innovation drives risk. We encourage risk-taking behavior, but risks that we can know. And data platforms, visibility are an important part of that story.
So, I mean, it's incredible what you've done, right? You're actually leveraging satellite data to get that visibility. And what we often see, and I'm sure you've heard recently that in the United States, some insurers are coming out of some specific risks spaces, but it feels like you are actually embracing the climate change and finding ways to help your clientele to find the right products, to be protected in the right way. So how has QB evolved its method from what it used to be to what it is today to actually build those new emerging risks, the new emerging product to support the risks which are emerging in climate?
It's all about engaging with the data platforms that I mentioned before. The biggest challenge that incumbent insurers have is that our systems tend to be older. We're rapidly upgrading them, we're rapidly replacing them, but what we have here today is a key example. We have some incredible insurtechs, but connecting those platforms through to our core is tremendously difficult. But a lot of what we've been doing in recent years has been finding ways to connect some of our legacy to some of these new exciting opportunities to essentially simplify the data coming in through these platforms. And we're in a world now where we can take data from a space-based radar system looking at flood depths in real time and actually connect that back to a core system, even if it happens to have been made in 1975. That's a real example. And what we're starting to do now is to understand the risks in climate-exposed areas much better. A hurricane in the United States is a key example. Wildfire in California is a key example. And if you can understand the risk, particularly where the risk is lower than you might expect, even if in toto it looks quite bad, you can carve out these opportunities to sell a product to a customer that you now know a lot better. Their fire exposure is lower, or they've replaced their roof with something that's not exposed to high wind loading in a hurricane. That means you can go to that customer and say, we've seen what you've done. We've seen the effort you've put in to reduce your risk, and here's an insurance policy that somebody else might not write. So it's that understanding of the specific nature of that risk, not the area, but that building, that particular customer, that gives you the opportunity to participate in markets that might otherwise look quite intimidating.
So yesterday, yes, we had this discussion, right, around climate, and what we also were able to see is you can combine new data sets with algorithmic platforms and IoT sensors. Louise, I'm coming to you, and what we see still, we have, as you know, still a data issue. We're lacking data, and we need a lot of data to make some of those risk assertions. So what are you doing at Mitiga to actually help the insurance client do better with the existing data and maybe with the new one as well?
First of all, I just want to mention very quickly that I'm not Alejandro, so I'm standing in for...
Oh, yes, that's true. This is Luis.
I'm Luis, so I'm standing in for our CEO, unfortunately could not join today. So Mitiga, we are, very quickly, we're a spin-off from the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. We like to call ourselves a climate tech company. So where we come from is really to focus on helping our clients on the insurance or insurance space to understand how climate, and this means both climate change and climate variability, actually has an impact on extreme weather and geophysical events, because that's, at the end of the day, what has an impact on assets, generally speaking. In terms of data gaps, I think we need to separate the problem in two levels. There's the level of climate modeling and climate science, and certainly there's a lot of data there. And the issue there is more of understanding how to make sense of all of these science, knowledge, data, and kind of distill it in a way that we still provide something that makes sense to the customer. But climate models really don't allow you to understand, to go to the level of resolution that you need to assess risk, hazard and risk to your property. So that's where the data gaps come into. When you're trying to go from the resolution of climate models, which are, let's say, 100 kilometer, 50 kilometer resolution, to go to the 100 meter or around that level of resolution. So then you start dealing with data poor countries, data poor regions that don't have data for you to validate your models. So for this we're leveraging mainly physics-based modeling, meaning we are able to go from the resolution of the climate model and extend those analyses, continuing to account for the physics of the processes we're trying to assess. For instance, wildfire. What are the drivers of wildfire activity? So atmospheric conditions, wind conditions, the conditions of the fuels on the ground. So we're able to, from a physics-based point of view, translate what are essentially translate these variables from the 100 kilometer resolution from climate models to the 100 meter level of on the ground to be able to actually simulate and estimate what's the hazard and risk for that property. So it's a combination of physics-based modeling, AI, and a lot of high-performance computing, which we can leverage because we are a spin-off from the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, and we also have an active partnership with Microsoft.
So it would be helpful if you could go a little bit deeper around what a high-resolution model, the high-resolution models you are building. Because sometimes, when I talk to insurers and we look at flooding or wildfire or different type of risk, I'm asked often that resolution. How far are we from the physical asset? And 100 meters for some is very far, partly from flooding. Maybe not for wildfire, but definitely from flooding. I'm often asked maybe 15 centimeters. So tell me, what can we do with all this tech?
15 centimeters is definitely too much. But you can go up to, I can tell you that so we focus mainly on what people still call secondary perils, which are not really anymore, but that's a whole other discussion. So we focus mainly on wildfire and what we call generally extreme weather. So hail and wind, extreme precipitation and drought, and extreme temperature. And just to give you the example of wildfire, we can go up to 30-meter resolution, which is kind of where we see a good trade-off between the resolution of the data and the results that you need to do a good enough job, and the compromise with respect to the computational costs that it takes to get to that resolution. So I would say that for let's say flood, because it's also a very localized peril, it makes sense to go to that type of resolution. For less localized perils, I mean, it all depends on the use case. You may not need to go as far, but the tools that we built allow us to go as far as necessary by leveraging. I mean, all state-of-the-art climate models are physics-based, but then how you go from that to the asset level, that's where approaches differ. So there's statistical-based approaches that you can use to still go to the 30-meter resolution, but the issue is that when you use a statistical-based approach, you're actually losing information.
Okay.
When you go from the climate model level data to, generally speaking, asset level data. Mm-hmm. If you use a statistical approach, you're losing information. By using a physics-based approach, you don't lose information, you're just adding information. To the system.
So, Alex, what would be your expectations, right? Listening to what Luis mentioned, physics-based modeling, would you use those? How do you see those playing into the QB environment?
It's really fascinating when you look at some of the more strongly emerging risks. I mean, wildfire is a key example. You look at some of the great work that Google has done, for example, in Climate Engine and Earth Engine, starting to look at fuel loading for wildfire, looking at soil moisture, the presence of various other factors, gives you a much better view of the environment in which our risks are placed. one of the most important things that we're going to have to get collectively used to is not so much predicting the future, of course you can't really do that, but using modeling to look at things like wind loading in hurricane areas is a classic example, looking at flood exposure again in flood exposed areas and hurricane exposed areas. This is where we really have the opportunity to do portfolio review. And portfolio review is all about prescience, looking at what might happen ahead of when it happens, starting to engage with our customers to say, did you know, because we know that your roof is of a type that gets damaged when the wind gets very high, or your property is made of wood on the outside, and in flood zones that doesn't work very well, and this is what a flood might look like. It's giving the customer the opportunity to take advantage of some of the information that we have through very advanced data systems that they simply don't have access to. If we sort of invert the insurance industry, if we give them this insight that we suddenly have, not into an entire portfolio, but their specific risk, this is where it becomes really meaningful to the customer, showing them what the physics-based model says, showing them what the data says, giving them the opportunity to make a decision that might mitigate that risk should it occur. And we're seeing some really positive signs in this. I mean, Hurricane Ian last year is a great example of this. There's some fantastic work that's being done looking at roof type and likelihood of damage, and we can see that tin roofs tend not to be tremendously damaged even when the wind really picks up, whereas bitumen shingle roofs are all but destroyed, and the water comes in after the wind blows and destroys the building inside. So giving the customer this visibility, helping them to understand the relationship between the risk, the event, and their particular exposure to that is starting to shift the narrative to make portfolios more defensible from the insurer's side, but helping the customer to take decisions, to take things into their own hands, to make themselves more insurable, but also, from a resilience perspective, helping them to participate in their own protection. And I absolutely love that.
So Sid, we heard about risk management, we talk about data, we talk about underwriting and changing the behavior of the customer really. And you are dealing with claims and carbon accounting, and you mentioned scope 3. So how do you use all these things, McKinsey, to actually start helping the insurer and their customer do better with regards to their claims?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's worth saying that insurers are still early in their journey on this. And you would have seen what I would almost call handcrafted initiatives around this over the last few years, right? Where you say, you've been in an accident, we've got to give you a replacement vehicle, but actually we're not going to give you a replacement vehicle, we're going to plant a tree. I think this happened during COVID a bunch. And of course that takes a bunch of carbon out of the claim handling process. That saves a bunch of money for the insurer, so it's both cost and carbon positive. And for most customers like me who are remote working for the vast majority of the week, I'm happy. Like, it's easier than actually getting a replacement vehicle and figuring out where to park it on the street, right? So there are, I would say, a few micro initiatives that have started to pop up here and there. But what we've started to do at McKinsey is say, how do you build a baselining asset that gives you a full holistic understanding of your entire claims handling process across multiple lines, and actually say, I spend €1 billion on claims a year, that is equivalent to X million tons of carbon. And as soon as you're able to make that baselining assessment, you suddenly start to see where carbon hotspots are in your handling and your handling decisions. Some of our research, we're going to put a paper out on this in the next couple of weeks, but some of our research shows that the decisions you take in your handling process can have as much as a 60% impact in your carbon output per claim. So that's quite significant, right? So the insurers in the UK who are leaning more towards certain types of handling strategies are putting out significantly more carbon per claim than others who are not. So it's a good time now, I think, to start to say, what is my baseline? Where are the carbon hotspots in my work? How do I understand, to your point, the areas where the sort of the 3 C's, right? So carbon, cost, sort of replacement cost for insurers, and customer can all be handled positively, starting to build out a marginal abatement cost curve to say, this is a portfolio of things that we could do today with today's emission factors to start to see cost, carbon, and customer improvements, while also understanding how you might start to design initiatives for the future as we get steel that is greener, cement that is greener, all of the input materials that are used in the industry in terms of replacing and remedying situations.
You know, it's interesting because when you look at Europe, we actually dependent from other countries, right, for resources, and we take those resources to build stuff. And you are talking about recycling, upcycling, repairing, and actually thinking about this value chain in very different ways. So we are an InsurTech conference. Can you tell us what maybe climate tech ventures you have identified to predict, mitigate, and prevent risk for those companies you're working with?
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously, prevention is immense in this space, right? If you're able to prevent the loss, then suddenly you take a whole bunch of carbon out of the equation completely. Some of the stuff Alex mentioned, I think, is super relevant, right? We're working with a couple of players who are using Earth observation to look at soil movement in properties. I'm sure most of you know, if a property is we have this problem in the UK a lot with subsidence, right? Property moves, starts to sink, you've got to pump cement into the ground under it to keep it, maintain the structural integrity. That is incredibly carbon intensive. So if you're able to monitor through satellites actual movement of soil, you could start to kind of address the situation before it gets pretty bad. Similarly, I live in London. I live in a terraced flat. We have an extension. Rear extensions, roof extensions are the places where water leaks start to emerge. And for those of you who know property claims, escape of water is an incredibly expensive, incredibly painful peril to manage. And so you could start to see how satellite-based technologies or sensors can start to help you to understand some of these dynamics before they play out and the severity of the situation gets bad. And so these are some of the ways in which technology, sensing, remote sensing, all of these sort of opportunities that we didn't have maybe 20 or 30 years ago can really play a role in helping you handle the claim, prevent the loss, manage the carbon.
So my last question to you all, starting with you and going like this. So what would be the recommendations, right? We are talking about being carbon positive. We are talking about transparency, right, and accountability around behavior. I think some of the other things about cost positive, looking at repair rather than replacing things. So what would be your recommendation for the insurance and their partners that they need to consider to be more successful?
Yeah, mine would be three simple things. The first is baseline. If you don't know how much carbon you're putting out there, you don't have a starting point. So building a good baseline. The second is really starting to say, how do I understand the economics of the situation? So taking an economist-based view on the marginal abatement cost curves. And the third is really partnering from a technology perspective as well as from a supply chain perspective. You can't actually address all the carbon in what you do if you don't work with your partners closely.
And if I can actually add something to what Sid just said, what is very important is understanding how to collaborate together, because when you are working as an InsurTech and then you're working with large incumbent, there is a huge difference in culture, in remuneration, and in the way that the company is organized. So the environment is absolutely pivotal in order to make sure that the great ideas that you do together actually do come to life, because that's the biggest challenge I see in all my work and everything I've done in my life.
So do you want to give me additional recommendation, or those are the three core recommendations?
I think these are the things that you need to look at. So first of all, there is a lot of opportunity to innovate here and to address the most important challenge that we face today in the world. But second, you need to understand what are those mechanics that you can actually put in place together in those three buckets of culture, remuneration structure, and those operations to make sure that you can actually deliver the project and create value to society.
Luis?
Yeah, it's already kind of mentioned here, but I think it's about shifting the focus from just responding and rebuilding to actually promote resilience and reward resilience. If there's no loss, there's no cost. There's no rebuilding, there's no carbon really associated with that. And there's already a push being done there. I mean, in the conversations we have with the different reinsurance players, we see them moving into this space, also pushed by sort of like legislative, regulatory developments that are being taken in the European Union, specifically with the EU taxonomy, that is pushing for resilient insurance. So we're starting seeing a push and move towards that direction.
Thank you. And Alex?
Look, I think the days of risk transfer as the only response to insurable events as that product standing alone is over. We have to accept that customers have to engage in the nature of their risk, that they have to understand what are the drivers of loss. I mean, if we look at natural events, wildfire in California, hurricanes in Texas and Florida, it's even cyber events, it's becoming very obvious that our customers have to act in a resilient way. They have to take advantage of the information that we can provide them, the remediation services that we can give them before a risk turns into a claim, and potentially reap the rewards that you get from demonstrating resilience. And this is a really strong theme that we've seen that customers that respond in a resilient way generally represent lower loss ratios as a cohort. So this is potentially an underwriting factor. This is something that we can start to say, yes, you're exposed to hurricanes. Yes, you're exposed to wildfire. Yes, you're exposed to cyber events, but we can see that you're acting in a positive way to address and understand that risk. And therefore, this is a product that we can sell you that we might not previously have been able to. And I strongly believe that this is the future of insurance across every product that exists.
So it's about climate resilience. We need to move from risk transfer probably to risk mitigation or prevention. And it's about changing the behavior of our customers. Well, on this note, let's give a big round of applause to my panel, please.
Thank you.